Hello and welcome to Dinis Guarda, Cities ABC Open Business Council YouTube podcast series. We are here again to continue with our series of profile interviews and as well discussions and conversations with some of the global leaders in technology, finance, branding, and especially looking at how we can actually create better ways, directions, visions to solve problems that we're facing in the world, in our society, in our businesses, in our operations, and specifically creating solutions that can empower us as humans, as society. One of the things we've been doing in over 150 interviews that comprehend ministers, government officials, leading universities, and as well some of the top CEOs in the world is precisely finding ways how technology can empower us, can be used as a force for good, but as well our business can actually look at solutions that can actually make a difference in our day-to-day operations. And as well, learning with each other, connecting with each other, and finding bridges and as well organizations. No man is an island, like John Donne said, and I think we are all part of this archipelago of ideas and business and ecosystems. And I think it's an ecosystem nowadays that makes any business become special, or any organization or any ecosystem. So today, I welcome to our series Richard Haigh, that is the Managing Director at Brand Finance, and as well graduated from University of Oxford, and is working in a project. So Brand Finance is a project that I'm quite a huge fan in the sense of creating solutions in terms of, first of all, measuring the brand impact in finance, and as well creating a lot of research and consultancy around that. And I think this is a critical element in terms of how you can actually look at any business worldwide. So Richard is the Managing Director of Brand Finance. He has lectured at universities and business schools, including London Business School, on topics surrounding brand valuation and management. And from his expertise and working with leading global brands and different sectors from banking to telecoms, airlines, sports, media, food, and much more, has been actually looking how brand impact is bigger and bigger, and as well how to look at first of all how we can actually measure branding, especially nowadays that everything is digital, but as well finding the kind of the brand hierarchy, a concept that they use, and as well how to recommend better methods to improve branding, architecture, portfolio management, and brand position. And I think this is, I would say, for any startup listening to us, is a key. And I'm sure that Richard is going to bring us a lot of valuable insights, but as well intelligence that can actually be used. And as well, Richard is, like I mentioned, a BA in mathematics from University of Oxford, is a chartered accountant, and is as well part of the Chartered Institute of Marketing and Brand Finance. So welcome to our series, Richard. I'm quite excited to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to having a discussion.
My pleasure. So I want to start. So Brand Finance is really doing very exciting work, and your background is really quite interesting as well in terms of this. But before we go to Brand Finance and the things you're doing, can you tell us a bit about you, background, what you've been doing, and how did you create and manage Brand Finance?
So I didn't actually create Brand Finance. David Haigh, my father, created Brand Finance, and that might give some people an idea as to how I got into it in the first place. As you say, I did maths at university. When I left university, I'd already been doing various stints at Brand Finance, and I thought it was particularly interesting. So I came to work and I essentially started my accountancy training, and then did some courses in marketing as well with the Chartered Institute of Marketing. And over the years, I just specialized in the various different forms that Brand Finance has to offer. You know, some of the tax items. I worked on a big tax case in the States with Brand Finance. I've worked on a lot of our sports offerings. So I've really got a lot of broad experience across the group and across the various different nations that we operate in. I spent some time in Singapore, spent some time in Sydney, and so I've got a good view of our different networks.
So can you tell us about the history of Brand Finance? So it was founded in 1996 with the aim of bridging the gap between marketing and finance. And I really like that because it's two areas that are very dear to me. So can you tell us about that? And of course, with 20 years, you have helped managing companies and organizations, all types to connect. So a bit of the history And I know that is a family business. I even respect that more because I think everyone likes the family to run and to go, and I'm particularly fond of family business that are strong and passing from father to son, like yourself.
Yeah. So when David set up brand finance 25 years ago, he originally qualified at PwC and he had a lot of accountancy experience, but he really found a fascination with brand and how it affected businesses generally. So he wasn't just satisfied with doing all the numbers and sitting in the background. He actually wanted to get at the forefront. And so when he set up brand finance, he found that not everyone agreed with him. Not everyone thought that it was they should be connected. And so it's been an uphill struggle for the last 25 years. But there have been significant advancements in the field and within the company as well in terms of the technical rigor that's required to do this sort of analysis. And I think over time, people have started to realize that, particularly as big tech that we'll get onto shortly, as other forms of intangible assets have become more important in businesses, the acceptance that an intangible asset in the form of brand can have a significant impact on the business has generally been accepted as well. So it's become slightly easier over time. I'd hope that we, in some small way, had a hand in pushing forward the case that brand is an important financial asset to be used. But certainly the environment has changed dramatically, not least because of globalization requiring the cross-charge of that intellectual property and intangible assets. But branding has needed to be measured and has become much, much more sophisticated over the course of the last 25 years. Brand Finance as a company, we have offices across the globe. We have got about 25 offices now. And for the last 15 years, we've been producing rankings of the most valuable brands in the world. And that's one of the things that we are most well known for. But that is just more to heighten people's awareness of the fact that you can value a brand. You can put a dollar value on the impact that that trademark and the brand is having to your overall business. And that's primarily why we do it. Ultimately, we're a consultancy and we help companies to overcome those brand related decisions. So whether it's transitioning from brand A to brand B, whether it's rationalizing a portfolio, whether it's understanding how the brand is impacting the business, that's the sort of thing that we do, to earn our money. And the rankings are just a very good way of heightening people's awareness surrounding it.
So one of the things I saw as well that you guys have been, so you have like different divisions of the group, and one of them is about education as well. Is the Brand Finance Institute, that is your educational division. And of course, the purpose is to create and foster a professional environment for knowledge sharing and networking across practitioners and experts in the market. So can you tell us about that? Because I know that is, like you mentioned, from probably the when the company started, of course, branding was not as important as it is now. Because now, for instance, if you look, even the billionaires are positioned their own brands, from the Bloomberg lists to Forbes lists, and this is becoming a critical element. And for me as an influencer as well, this is dear, because all the influencer lists and right now together with the Fortune 500 are becoming the global benchmarks for companies, and in some ways can actually create a big difference, create a lot of business network, but create a lot of criteria about this. So if you could tell a bit some of the products you have, especially like the Brand Finance Institute, but other different things and some of the rankings that you want to highlight.
Sure. Yeah, the Brand Finance Institute, we set up because ultimately the best way to get people to adopt something is to get them to understand it. And when it comes to understanding the evaluation and measurement of brands, the best thing to do is make sure that teams and clients are fully on board with what you're doing. There's nothing worse than walking into a client and having some combative member of the board or something like that say, oh no, I don't know anything about this, and therefore it's no good. So the Brand Finance Institute was really set up as a way of helping people to understand both how to appreciate brand and how to measure and manage it, so that they can better sort of action the results of our work. We've been doing it for many years. We organize a lot of webinars. Well, over the last year, it's been mostly webinars, but before then it was events. And it's been generally very well received. A lot of our other rankings, so as you mentioned, everyone loves a ranking, even influencers like you. The big difficulty has been, oh, well, sorry, not difficulty. Well, I suppose it is a difficulty in deciding which ones to do and when to do them. As I mentioned, we do these commercial rankings of the most valuable brands in the world, but we also do one on the most valuable sports clubs, which is primarily focused around football clubs. We also do one on the soft power of nations, which is a particularly interesting one that we started many years ago, and we've recently enhanced with a global survey of 80,000 people in 100 different countries. And that is all on perceptions of nations and how that impacts people's decisions related to those countries. And a final one, which is more personal, is the Brand Governance Index, which we started about 2 years ago or 3 years ago when we began launching our tables at the World Economic Forum in Davos. And that is primarily focused on bringing the CEO into the discussion about brand and ranking their brand governance of the organization that they are ultimately the brand ambassador for. And that's been very well received. And we're hoping it will continue to bring the boardroom into the discussion about brand in a big way, not just for the well-known CEOs, but for all of the CEOs who perhaps are more engineering focused, who are yet to fully embrace the power that a brand can bring to an organization.
Yeah, this is kind of, I would say, the most important thing for our times. And I think especially it's becoming increasing even more powerful because of COVID-19 and everything that is happening in the last 2 years, that we have a substantial increasing impact on the digital impact of a brand. And as well, of course, right now, there's a lot of considerations in terms of ESG and different areas. So from the work you've been doing on this, so for people that know less about you guys, can you tell us how it works, the different reports you're doing, and as well, so for instance, you mentioned a couple of the reports. You have the soft power index as well. That is an interesting one for the top 100 nations with over 75,000 people surveyed. So a bit how we create this impact, these indexes, and as well how you look at expanding this, but purely from a digital perspective, and of course from a research perspective, how you put this together.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if I want to go into the methodologies on each of those different ones, I will have to talk about each one specifically. So the Brand Governance Index focuses on a survey of equity analysts and their perceptions of different CEOs, as well as some other measures that are available, such as social listening to see what the sentiment is regarding those CEOs, and some other measures related to brand from our tables. They're then aggregated together and weighted in terms of different importance levels, and included within that ranking of an index score out of 100. The soft power, as I mentioned, that is a survey of 88,000 people in 100 different countries. And again, that is split into 7 pillars, which are based on the perceptions of those respondents. Ultimately, it's things like, are there big brands that you know? Is the culture what you like? Do you like the food? Is the education good? Are you aware of them? Do they have a good reputation? Do they match your cultures and values? So a whole host of different measures from a questionnaire of about 32 different questions. And again, they then come together, we weight them to an index score out of 100, and that's the end result for the soft power. It's very interesting. I mean, there's a full in-depth deep dive report that's available on our website if you want to know more about that one. But I could get lost talking about that because it's absolutely fascinating. And then when it comes to the commercial valuations, which also applies for the sports teams, we do what's called a royalty relief valuation, where essentially we imagine, if I didn't own this brand and I had to pay someone to use it, how much might I be willing to pay? So it's financially oriented, but also there's an element of behavioral analysis and perceptions, because ultimately what you're willing to pay for a brand will be based on how much uplift you think it's going to be giving to your business. And so if you think it's a strong brand and people like it and respond to it, then you're going to be willing to pay more. And so what we do for that is a global brand equity monitor, which is once a year. We interview, I think this year it's going to be about 50,000 people in 40 different countries and 40 different industries to get their perceptions of about 4,000 different brands, which then feed into our tables. That's a very important part, because understanding how good or bad essentially the brand is, both from a perception level and also a financial level, is what's important when creating those lists and analyzing how any brand is affecting a business. So it's different things for different solutions for different questions, really. And so each of those different studies we do in a slightly different way. When it comes to how we look at digital and the impact that that has, we can look at it in two different ways, both the direct impact and the indirect impact. So we can put in measures, and sometimes we do, it depends on the specific circumstance, that are specifically digitally focused. But sometimes what we do is we'll just measure the perceptions of those digitally focused aspects. So we might question respondents, does this brand have good websites and apps, for example? And if it does, or if their perception is that it does, then that's half the battle, really, because you can have great websites and apps, but if nobody knows about them or thinks that they're good, then you haven't really solved that need or question. And I suppose that's one of the big questions when it comes to digital transformation, is making sure that those leaps forward are actually resonating with the stakeholder that you're hoping that they do.
I want to touch a bit this, because this is a very, very important thing. And so let's look, for instance, at probably one of your most high profile rankings, that is the top 100 nation brands, where we surveyed over 75,000 people. Can you specifically elaborate on this one? Because I think it's quite a big one, and 75,000 people is quite a lot of people. But as well, I'm interested to look, because one of the biggest things is when it talks about nation and brands, this is a big thing that touches everything, especially right now with economical constraints and challenges that we have with COVID, but as well as we become increasingly digital economics.
I might ask you to sort of elaborate on exactly what sort of angle you're looking at there.
Yeah, just elaborate how it works. First of all, how it works, the survey, the 100 nations brands,
Sure.
the power index on that level, and as well. Well, let's look at this one in particular, how it works, how you look top level, of course, the methodology. Because I'm particularly interested on this, and of course this podcast, is Cities ABC Open Business Council, is all about brands and nations, so it's quite interesting as well for me.
Yeah, so the mechanically, the way that we do it is an online survey, but we also have some specialist audiences as well that go into the study. So those are people from embassies, the academics, those from universities, things like that, and they have particular specialist knowledge of various different countries. And it's interesting comparing and contrasting the average public to those specialist and informed respondents. Both of them follow a very similar questionnaire, and that is mechanically how we go about doing it. And with that comes all of the same difficulties that you get with any form of market research. When it came to the creation and genesis of the study, we looked at all the materials available. We looked at some of the things that, say, Joseph Nye had originally started talking about when he started talking about the soft power nations and things like that, and incorporated that into the framework that we use for the study. It then launched every year in our report in middle of February, sort of generally around the 22nd of February. This year we had Hillary Clinton as our headline speaker. Last year we had Ban Ki-moon as our headline speaker. And alongside them, we have various other very, very interesting and recognized experts in their various different fields. The list is about 24 every year, so I won't list them all now. But it's available online if anyone wants to see that and see what they had to say about it. The reason that we did it was not just because we wanted to pit, in a political sense, one country against another. We were doing it from a perspective of, well, these countries all produce brands, and they all use their brands to entice money into the market. So, for example, German cars work particularly well as an example because people like German engineering, they like Germany, they think it's very reputable, and so they have a lot of respect for the brands that they produce in those specific fields. So product of origin and geographic branding and all of that sort of clustering that still occurs like it did back in the Middle Ages is still something that's incredibly powerful. And all these countries are vying to create hubs for whatever it might be. An example that is very close to home for me is the Great campaign for the UK. So they launched this campaign about a decade ago to try and deliberately foster a lot of different industries and demonstrate their potential internationally. And so that was all about creating this center of excellence within the UK to say our products are very quality. And that's a way that they can have a competitive edge against the international market. So we were trying to see how nations and geographic origin helps commercial brands, while at the same time surveying what is a very interesting study. To digress slightly, one of the most interesting things is seeing what the country thinks of themselves versus what the world thinks of the country. That's always very enlightening, particularly for somewhere like the UK. That doesn't always match up, particularly around Brexit.
Yeah, it is interesting, and I'm sure that you find a lot of interesting, I would say, findings that sometimes a bit out of the scope that you would think in a lot of layers. So coming back to this and continuing on the global soft power index. So just for me to understand, so from some of the findings, so I know that most of these reports, then you have to pick them and companies can buy it. But have you been, for instance, collaborating with the countries, or this is purely report based and then consultancy companies can buy it? Or do you have as well a relationship with these countries, in this case specific of the global soft power index?
Well, so when it depends what you mean specifically by country. There are plenty of national
institutions, some of the national institutions, yeah.
There are plenty that are interested in the study, and we provide them with the data for a fee, and we help them with whatever nation branding questions that they have. So there are plenty of nations that are engaged and involved in the study itself. Yeah.
Okay, very interesting. And then, so from let's say from the work that you've been working in terms of, for instance, that's the brands ranking as well, because you have, I mentioned right now, the nation brands and the global brands. So you have a lot of different areas here. For instance, you have by country, you have the airports, the leisure and tourism. So what would be like the most successful that you have? And a bit of, if you want to just highlight about one of them, because you have quite a lot. I saw here around 626, I think, that appears in your website.
Well, it's not 626. I mean, that is every year.
Yeah, I understand all the years. Yeah,
so,
I understand. Well, but still, it's rankings for every year. Let's put it that way. Yes.
Yeah. Well, we do about 90 each year, and I suppose, I mean, the obvious one to say is the global is our most popular, because it includes all countries and all industries. But if I'm ignoring that one and saying which ranking is the most popular, it would probably be the banking study. Again, banks are very highly branded, very competitive, always looking to compete against one another, and therefore brand is particularly important. It's also an easy industry for most of the people are quite numerate, and therefore they like the whole measurement aspect. So that's very popular. But then the football ranking is also always exceptionally popular, as one would assume. And so we probably get more engagement from CEOs with the football study than with the studies of their respective industries or countries, because they're just personally interested in how it works and things like that. So yeah, it's a bit of variety, really. It's difficult to say which one, but probably it would be the banking or the football.
So let's go through banking and football. I have some questions on that. So on the banking, so for instance, I'm so there's every year there's one, and there's your banking 500. So, and this established the world most valuable banking brands and as well their impact. So could you just highlight a bit about specific this one, the Banking 500 from 2021? I'm particularly interested to hear your views from perspective of the producer of the report.
Views in what sense? Views in how they've done?
No,
Or?
some of the conclusions that you have, for instance, in comparison to previous years, and some of the things, so some of the findings. So for people listening to us from a more kind of top level perspective, what has been the focus of the Banking 500?
Well, I mean, one of the changes that we've been seeing is digital transformation and how that is how banks are adapting to that. Obviously, 2020 was a very difficult year for many banks as well, and so there was a lot of struggle and a lot of banks, yeah, well, not just banks, but all industries, the brands often went backwards in terms of brand value. So the banking study this year was really about that change and that transition, and how are they going to get through and how are they going to recover, while at the same time all of the other themes that we're seeing around the world, such as the rise of Chinese brands and particularly the Chinese banks. Off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly the top 10, but I think it is now largely dominated by the Chinese big banks, and that will continue to be so, and they will continue to sort of dominate the position. The question is whether they're going to go global in a bigger sense. The other themes of digitalization we covered in 2019, or actually at 2020 in our global forum, and we were talking about how and whether blockchain would be impacting just generally the way that we perceive the finance industry, whether it would be more broad than just crypto. I think it's almost certainly going to be the case that it will be, because the applications are quite numerous, but they just haven't got to that point yet. There was a big question 2 years ago as to what direction people thought the world would go when it came to banking, and whether because of the rise of blockchain and things like that, there would be a big shakeout of hundreds of banks, and you would end up with just reserve banks, and the MiFID II regulations would allow it to be such that you then didn't need quite as many payment systems, or we didn't need quite as many banks to facilitate all the payments that would be needed through these various new technologies coming in. And that was very interesting. And I don't think it's been proven to be true or nearly as fast as some people thought that it would happen, because consumers are slow moving. They still like the big brands that they know. They still have that cozy feeling. And so those new and a bit more out there technologies just haven't been adopted quite as quickly as they thought they would be.
This is very interesting insights, and that's a podcast in itself. So I want to touch, so just on this part of the research about the brand finance. So for instance, especially the Banking 500, one of the things I see here as well is that you have, for instance, the Chinese banks that you mentioned, but there's as well, for instance, US bank, I still have 5 spots, and then the spotlight in Vietnam and emerging markets. So are you doing, so this research in terms of, for instance, we collaborating with the Oxford University, and first they have a huge focus on emerging markets. So for this kind of research, you do it purely based on the banks, or you have as well teams going to these countries doing research, just for me to understand this kind of insights that you have.
Sorry, I can't quite recall what specific aspect you're talking about.
So my question is, in terms, when you do research in terms of geographic location of, for instance, brands, because of course you have teams around the world, but just for me to understand, for instance, you have the spotlight on Vietnam that you see as the greatest year-on-year brand value growth compared with other nations. So can you tell us some of the metrics you use for that? Because it's an interesting part. It's very difficult as well, because for instance, one of the things I've been finding when I do research, or I ask companies to work with us on these different things, is, okay, how do you look at language details? How do you look at the digital perception, even the different demographics and things like that? So I just want to understand this geographical part of the branding, if more or less some kind of the levels of the metrics that you use.
That's there are a few different ways to answer this question. So from a financial side, we do the valuations, and the rankings that you see on our website, they are based on where the company and the brand is headquartered. So although obviously Coke operates around the world and might be one of the biggest brands in many different countries, we only feature it in our US table as an example. So when we look specifically at Vietnam, it is all of the brands and companies that are headquartered in Vietnam. And they might be increasing, and that might not just be in Vietnam, that might be any of their operations globally that are increasing as well. When we do the valuation, we look at where they are creating the revenue, not just where they are based. So if they're creating it, say, in Thailand as well as Vietnam, then we will do both of those valuations simultaneously, but separately, and look at the brand in those two different markets, which then gets me onto the second point, where we're not just looking at the financial side of things, but we're looking at the perception side of things as well. And so we get into the consumer equity research and some of the other measures that we include in our brand strength index, which is part of the valuation process and evaluation process that we use to, again, crudely to assess the strength and how good or bad the brand is in doing its function of influencing the perceptions of various different stakeholders. So we'll do our online survey of consumers to see how they think and feel about the different brands. Vietnam has been growing very quickly, and one of the reasons why it will have been increasing in our table as the fastest growing will largely be financially oriented. Their brands have been growing quite rapidly across the entire spectrum, and that's why they will be one of the fastest growing in our table. That's essentially, it's a combination of both the perceptions and also the financial elements. I can go into more detail in terms of how we do that if you'd like.
No, I think it's okay, because I want to go through a couple of other questions, and you answer very well. Thank you so much. And I think it's very important because I've been working with countries and governments, and one of the things sometimes that is challenging is definitely to find the data, both around the country, but as well the banks. And I think your methodology seems to be fantastic on that level, and it touches a lot of these metrics that are really critical. So I want to go right now to brand finance football. So I'm interested in that because, of course, you are during the Euro. I'm not a huge, crazy football fan, but I have a lot of respect for the industry. So I know that is a completely different area, but it shows as well the versatility of your platform and as well the work you've been doing. So I'm looking right now at the Brand Finance Football 50 from 2021. I don't know if it's something that you have top of your mind, if you want to open probably the window and have a look, but just top level. No, take your time, no worries. I think it's important. I can just go through a couple of things. So you have from a lot of interesting insights. And of course, this is an interview snapshot about all the different things you guys are doing, but it shows as well the strength of the branddirectory.com, and this is available for people listening to us, to branddirectory.com on the ranking sections, and of course the strength of the brand finance, and of course this is an interesting thing because, for instance, we have football, but a lot of the other sports. For instance, I was studying cricket in India, and for instance, if you look at all the sports or tennis or things like that, it's really a big thing right now, and I think especially as we get into an economics of society and health and wellness and different areas, this is going to be even more important.
Yeah, I forgot to mention the IPL study. We've been doing that for many years as well, and that always gets very good pickup, but only in specific parts of the world. The football seems to be more
it's more
ubiquitous.
Yes. So I don't know if you had time, but just some highlights about the way you look at this, and of course this is football. Just for people listening to us, is football 50. Which is the top football, most powerful brands in football, I think, worldwide. And it has a lot of interesting insights, but I think it shows as well the work, the wealth of the work you guys are doing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where to start with it, really.
Just a summary, a snapshot. It's a summary.
We started it 15 years ago because our finance director at the time was obsessed with football, and we set up the corporate tables, and he thought, I've got to do that for football brands. And so he did. And in the first year that we did it, it had some questionable measures because he did it almost as a personal interest piece. One of the measures was his personal opinion as to the style of play by each of the different teams. Those measures have not.
That one is a very subjective one.
those measures have long come out. They came out in about the second or third year, and we've replaced them now with a fan survey of football fans in 7 different markets, 5 European markets, plus China, plus the US. Again, asking them on their perceptions of both the brands, the sponsors, and various other different measures about the leagues and what they know and who they follow. And the results of that have been fascinating as well. The difference between China and the US, for example, in terms of consumption of football, both European football and their own domestic leagues, is very interesting. Some of the work that we've done regarding sponsorship analysis and the sort of the decay rate of people being aware of football clubs or of the sponsorships of football clubs is very interesting as well. And it shows the longevity that a sponsorship can give to a brand. Once we get into the topic of sport and sponsorship and all that sort of stuff, it's very fascinating to see clubs or companies like Ineos, who have made a very conscious choice recently to get into sport, to get themselves known. The relationship between brands and Formula One and motorsport, so car brands, but not just car brands, oil and gas brands, so Shell being a very obvious one, and their relationship with Ferrari over the years. All of these different sponsorship aspects have been fascinating to look at and analyze, because of not just the impact that they can have in the short term if they are activated and done in the right way, but the long-term impacts that these relationships can have, and how long they can go on, and how long they sort of remain in the minds of people. So the football survey or the football ranking, although it started off as a little bit of a joke, we quickly realized that actually the applications were much more fascinating. And to give a very quick financial summary of how we do it, there are 3 primary revenue streams for a football club. There's match day revenue, which is obvious, broadcasting revenue, which is obvious, and commercial revenue, which is sort of a catch-all for everything else. And that's mostly related to sponsorships and partnerships and things like that. And so we are ultimately, again, if the club didn't own the brand, how much would it have to pay to someone else to use its brand on those various different revenue generating streams? It's a bit difficult for some people to get their head around, particularly if they live right next to the football club, because they would never dream of changing club. They are the fan. I mean, they are born into it. But in a way, you can think of that as just a brand with a very, very high loyalty, almost 100% loyalty. But then when you look at the brand internationally, particularly in sort of China or any other market, that's where the concept of it being a brand makes a lot more sense. And the commercial that can come behind it and all that sort of stuff. But I mean, the state of the market is changing. China has an ambition to win the World Cup. And with that comes the building of a domestic league, which I'm sure will start to rival some of those in Europe relatively soon. I don't know when exactly, but it is almost certainly on the horizon. And so the shape of the table may change. But again, it's down to information. And if we don't have the financial information, we won't be able to include them. So hopefully we will, but that's yet to be seen. So I mean, I could keep talking about the various different things we're doing. Is there anything in particular you'd like?
No. I think it's great, and I have a couple of more questions, and of course we're picking the time, so I'm conscious of your time. But I have 2 more questions, more broader. So I thank you so much for all the insights and intelligence around these different ranks, which is, congratulations, really a massive amount of work that is here. But it shows as well the strength, because like you mentioned, it started probably as a joke, but football is a massive multi-billion-dollar industry that is going to become probably even bigger. And of course, it's especially one of the things I learned working with countries and nations and cities is the important it is, because one event like this can actually bring a huge amount of business for a city. And it as well touches a completely different ranking of the city. If you look at cities like Dubai, Barcelona, or even Singapore, which is a city-state, part of their brand has been built around events like this, and as well creating a lot of different perception of taking this to the next level. So
just to jump in on that, I mean, it ties in nicely with the soft power element, the sport being a great vessel for soft power. because it is both, building awareness of the city, of the venue. It's also demonstrating the importance of sport and competitiveness, and those different values that any sport, not just football, can bring. So cities and nations getting involved in it is a great way of having that sort of soft diplomacy to get their message out there. And when we're doing our soft power this year, we're actually going to be approaching various different cities to see if they would like to be featured, and whether they'd like us to include questions about them internationally, and see what people think of them and whether they're aware of the cities and all of that sort of stuff. Because it's almost more important to cities and regions than the nations themselves, in terms of attracting attention and investment. Because if you attract international attention, it also attracts domestic attention as well. And so that's going to be the next step up for the soft power, is not just looking at countries but also cities. And sorry, I got on a bit of a tangent because of the sport connection there, but we often get asked about how sport can be used as a vessel for soft power.
Yeah, I would say there is more than soft, and right now is the power. You can take the soft, because in the end of the day, the cities that don't really perform on these areas, they want to attract tourism, they want to attract business, they want to attract investment. Let's look even in London, where we're based. That is, of course, one of the top cities in the world. Part of the success is the bridge between events, sports, like the Olympic Games, and as well all the different relationships between business, tourism, attraction, and as well the different areas. So this is really actually very powerful and very demanding as well. So that brings me to my last part of the interview, that is about the brand valuation, which is of course critical. And of course you have the websites for people listening to us, brandfinance.com and branddirectory.com, which is a very powerful website as well in terms of search, and has most of the rankings we're talking about. So of course you guys are global experts in brand valuation, and for instance right now we have all the Forbes lists, we have as well Bloomberg trying to position themselves especially in the billionaires lists, which is right now a competition between the two rankings. But one of the things I've been finding out is really when it comes to especially social and economical benchmark, like you just mentioned, for cities and for countries, this kind of rankings become more and more important, because for instance, first of all, a city can actually better manage their attraction of talent, attraction of funding, or even marketing and PR and business. But at the same time, it can create a lot of social economical benchmarks, because if you start understanding that the perception of a city is very negative, international, you better do something about it. So I would like just to understand from the expertise that you guys have in branding. For instance, there's in your website, there's a fantastic part here that is how we look at the brand's business case. And I think this is particularly interesting because, of course, I work with a lot of startups and founders and investors, and our audience is a lot of people within the C-level and as well entrepreneurs. So there's 5 things here that you guys highlight, and I would like for elaborating a bit that, but I would elaborate that from the digital angle perspective. So there's the question, how much my brand is worth? How much should I invest in marketing? How much damage does brand misuse cause? Am I tax compliant with the latest transfer pricing? How do I unlock value in a brand acquisition? And I think these 5 questions are critical. I think you can replace the word brand in business, because the two things are more and more blurred. And I would like to understand, of course, the question is quite big. I'll try to make it as clear as possible. So the bridge between the brand valuation, which is the key element here, the business valuation, and as well the digital part of the brand versus the offline part of the brand. So I'd like to see this for these 3 different angles. How do you look at it? And as well, some of the top level, of course, some of the experience you have on this, and I know that the digital part is becoming more and more relevant, but as well understand, well, I would say the brand is much more relevant because branding is key right now, but the digital and the business. So the 3 things blur together, but I would like to hear your opinions within the context of your research and as well the metrics that you've been studying.
Sure, yeah. Well, I'll start with that last question first, in relation to brand, both digital and offline. And I would say that it's dangerous to distinguish the two, because ultimately the brand needs to be everything, all the different touch points that you have not just to consumers, but to all different stakeholders. Ultimately, the best companies live the brand through and through, and it's embedded entirely in their organization, from their hiring policy to their appraisals to the way that they deal with suppliers and things like that. And so ultimately, whilst the digital aspect of the brand is just one different touch point, it shouldn't necessarily be separated and looked at completely differently. Some businesses only have digital brand elements, and some obviously are now having to go through that transition to have more of a digital presence. And again, it comes down to what is relevant, what is actually driving value to the business. Often it's very easy, as anyone that's worked with lots and lots of data will understand, it's very easy to look at the wrong things and concentrate on all of these different metrics. And that's one of the difficulties with digital branding at the moment, is that there's so much noise, there's so many different data points that you can take. The question is, should you bother looking at them, or should you, like, which ones should you look at and which ones should you potentially ignore? And that's going to differ from organization to organization based on what the specific challenges and pinch points are at any given time. But it is something worth doing, obviously, and to work out what is really driving the business and how investment into various different aspects can help improve those different stakeholder perceptions for whoever it might be. Does that answer
No, he answers very well. So I want to touch one question related with this, and I think it's an area that I don't see you guys so much focus, but it's particularly important for me as a social media influencer, and is the social media impact and the influencer industry on the branding. Because, for instance, even me, that I've been working with big brands myself, and both as a consultant or both as actually working in investment bank and big tech and finance companies. And one of the things I found, especially in the last 10 years, and especially specifically in the last 5 years, is a shift from, of course, the likes of the giants of Google and Facebook. They control a huge part of they still control a huge part of the marketing and budget for branding and for anything related with business developing. I would say that from most of the studies, I think from each $100 spent in marketing or in business, probably 80% goes to Facebook and Google groups alone. But one of the questions I see, and this is the finding that I've been really getting, is that influencers, and I'm not talking just about B2C, B2B and B2C, are really becoming really one of the biggest right now drivers of business. And of course, even your company is an influencer as a brand as well. But of course, there's the business and the influencer part of this. So how do you look at the social media angle when it comes to branding and to the research that you're doing? Because I know that you guys touch that, but it's not completely your area of focus.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, because again, it's going to be different in every specific scenario, and you're going to have to look at it slightly differently in terms of the way that people interact. But broadly, we do look at it in terms of tracking the general sentiment and the word of mouth, and whether people have been talking about the brand online and various things like that. So we do look at it in a sense, and we look at how much people are investing, and whether they are some rudimentary things like follower numbers and all that sort of stuff. But it almost feels like that is somewhat irrelevant now, versus the way that you could look at it in a more sophisticated way. Ultimately, this actually is a good question when it comes down to broadly how we do the rankings and how we do more bespoke projects. So when we're looking at more bespoke projects, we can take account for the nuance in the scenario. Whereas when we're looking at the rankings, we have to do something that's a bit, one size fits all, because the ultimate goal is benchmarking cross industry, cross country, a lot of brands, so that people can have a general understanding of where the line in the sand is and where they sit. It's not designed to be pinpointing the strategy decisions that they need to make. We do that in a different way, and that would come with analyzing how influencers can drive the different sales channels, because ultimately it's just the same old things in a brand new way when it comes to influencers and advertising online. It's just something that companies will have to adapt to and use in new and exciting ways. And an influencer, I mean, whether it's you, whether it's, I wouldn't really say that we are necessarily an influencer, but if you say so, it's just the same as, old print media. They were influencers of the time, a journalist or whatever. you just use it in different ways. So you just have to adapt to what you're doing and how you're appreciating things. And we do, as I say, we do look at some of those measures, but it's much harder unless you're doing a specific detailed project on it.
So I'm going right now a bit provocative, but in a good way. So for instance, with the data that you have, which is quite amazing because it's 25 years of measuring some of the biggest brands and ecosystems around the world. So are you using tools like machine learning or artificial intelligence right now to start creating patterns and understanding, for instance, benchmarks on that level? Because I think this is another area that you're going to have to deal, that is artificial intelligence, machine learning, driven brand building, and it's already a lot of automation around brand building, but of course it's about authenticity, and that you cannot automate. But I just would like to hear your opinion.
Interestingly, we are going through a process of more automation, even with a company that is a consultancy like us. There is a lot of automated items that we can just make more simple. When it comes to machine learning and AI related specifically to the valuations, we have some data points, but we don't have really enough data points to pinpoint exactly what's going on in all situations. But we do have it in a lot of situations. So when it comes to the research that we're doing related to the consumer equity study that goes into the league tables, we've got some very good analytical software there that can look at what the brand drivers are and what's most important in driving things forward. And that's really fascinating. When it comes to machine learning, that's a little bit more difficult in terms of what we need to do. And the problem there is that there are thousands of different cases. So to train the machine into what is correct or not is very, very difficult. We don't have enough cases where we can say, okay, this is the correct answer, and train the machine in that way. There's a lot more judgment in it, but hopefully over time we will be able to incorporate some of those things because they are coming in and they're getting more sophisticated. But right now, every day when we're looking at the way we do these brands, there's a new case as to how someone has specifically organized their brand architecture, or how they're endorsing this one or that one, or how they are engaging in this way or that way, or how they report their finances. And so to do that machine learning is very, very difficult to find enough cases where you can say, okay, that's the definitively correct way of doing that. But yeah, I mean, in an ideal scenario, we'd have loads of machine learning and automation and things like that. It's just not quite as easy to get to that point.
And I think it's really going to be one of the, I think what I see right now, especially for instance with TikTok, not necessarily because of the hype around TikTok, but what I find looking at TikTok is the formidable capacity of looking at how they look the trendings around topics, and they create benchmarks. So it's all driven by AI, and it's really very impressive because Facebook was already impressed in terms of creating trends and all the hashtags and stuff like that. And I see a lot of brands even coming to us and trying to engage on that. But I've been finding a huge, really impact that this is going to be. And as well, I would say the next 5 to 10 years is, I think the ones that control this will actually be the ones building the biggest brands, and as well disrupting a lot of different things. But of course, I think there's still the basics and the foundations that will not change. It's just the tools that we use for these foundations. So that gives me to, and I'm cautious of your time. I think we're passing around 1 hour. So just 1 or 2 more questions if you still have time.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of this work that you guys have been doing from the different, both the work of benchmarking brands and the valuation of brands and the finance around the brands, there's as well a work with the experts and with an industry that you've been nurturing and creating. And a lot of the things you guys have been doing is working and looking at methodology that you partly touch with international outlines like ISO standards and things like that. So can you elaborate how we look at your work and your research with this kind of international benchmarks? And for people listening to us, ISO is an international standard that is used to look at requirements around a lot of different benchmarks for business, both from technology to other things. And it's part of well, I think it's difficult to put this, but it's an international, independent, non-governmental international organization and a membership with 165 national standard bodies. So for people listening to us, because I know that a lot of people don't think about this, but this is going to be increasing more and more important. Sorry, the question, I think, you clear.
I mean, the ISO is a very interesting organization. It obviously has hundreds of standards on a whole variety of different things, from IT security to whatever. But it now has two specifically related to brands, one on brand valuation and one on brand evaluation. So the ISO 10668 is the one on brand valuation. That is what we helped to write. And then the ISO 20671 on brand evaluation is also another standard that we helped to write. And both of them do things in slightly different ways, but ultimately are there to evaluate the brand and give guidance as to how you should do that. I mean, brand valuation, I've seen some books say there are 300 different ways to value a brand. And I mean, I would argue that that's true, because in broad terms, a lot of those 300 are actually the same methodology with very, very slight nuanced tweaks related to the specific industry that you're doing it, which I wouldn't really consider as a different way of doing it. I would just consider a different application of the same way of doing it, if you see what I mean. But the standards are incredibly important. They give people confidence in the fact that it is a respected discipline, that it is a discipline in itself, and give people confidence that it's going to be done in a consistent way, so that they can go to whoever the provider is, hopefully brand finance, and get a valuation and know that it's meeting certain criteria, and know that it will be done with a certain amount of rigor and independence. That means it can be relied upon. And I mean, going back to your question about what those questions are on our website, so how much is my brand worth? It's very important for people to understand where best to allocate their resources when it comes to a different asset that they have at their disposal. How much should I invest in marketing? That's a very difficult sort of question to answer, but that's something that marketing departments often come to us to say, I've got a budget, I need to know where to spend it, or I need to demonstrate that I should have a budget to my CFO. Can you sort of demonstrate the uplift? How much does the damage of brand misuse cause? That's sort of more of a legal aspect. So again, when it comes to legal arguments, you need standards so that you can make sure that when you go to court, you can demonstrate that it's been done in the right way. When it comes to the tax compliance, they're the ones that have really driven a lot of these standards, not just through the ISO, but through things like the IVSC as well, which is the International Valuation Standards Committee, or Council, sorry. And it's the tax authorities that are really driving a lot of this different change, because they want to make sure that people will stick within the guidelines, and that there are guidelines in place as to how brands can be charged for cross-border and things like that. And also when somebody, whether they overvalue or undervalue a brand in specific circumstances, again, having an ISO standard is incredibly important to the confidence that you can have behind the way that the valuation has been done. So of the various different brand valuation firms that you see out there, some of them do follow the ISO and have the ISO, some of them don't. But I would definitely say that making sure that the person that you are dealing with is accredited is an incredibly important thing, so that you know that they are doing it in the right way.
Yeah, no, this is kind of a critical element, and I think shows as well the requirement, or the increasing requirements that business and brands need to follow, because you cannot just get into that without looking at this. Well, there's been a lot of things here, I think, to digest. So I would like, probably as the last notes is, so any things that you, I think, from the work that you do right now, I know that there's a lot of continuous reports that are coming. For instance, you mentioned we had football, we had the finance, we had the banking, we had a lot of the soft power, and as well, for instance, the work you did with in February, you had Hillary Clinton as well being part of one of your events. So that shows as well the impact, and as well the global dimension of your platform. But from all the different things that you have right now, what would be the highlights for people listening to us that don't know so much about brand finance?
Well, I'd say that the highlights are probably the insights section of our website. So there is some there are some fascinating articles there that sort of demonstrate many different use cases for how monitoring and measuring the value of brand can bring significant benefit to your business. There are some great articles about how using it in brand architecture scenarios or sponsorship scenarios can help to unlock significant value. In licensing scenarios, how it can be used to make sure you don't leave any money on the table, in M&A as well, to make sure that things are best planned. So I'd say that that's probably one of the highlights that actually we haven't talked about. But when it comes to the work that we do, I mean, there's some fascinating stuff that we do with regression analysis to look at how we are or how brand changes customer and consumer habits. And that's some very interesting stuff as well, to monitor or to quantify that and see how it impacts not just brand, but overall business performance as well. So that's very interesting too.
Yeah, no, and I think one of the articles that is, I think, from David Haigh, of course. So it's a vision, and it's actually recent. I want to touch this if it's okay. It's from the family, but I think it's important. There's one article that I really like, that is our vision for improving brand valuation. So can you highlight on this? So I will just, for people listening to us, so this is an article from April 2021 that is on the 25th anniversary of brand finance. And I think I'll just read a bit of an introduction. We have been bridging the gap between marketing and finance continuously since 1996. We have maintained the same principle through those 25 years and are now present in 25. So I think if you could highlight this, so this vision after 25 years, because I think that is really very important. And because of course, a lot of people right now, especially depends of how much you are into branding or how much you are into digital, are more normally thinking short term, but with 25 years, you can actually have a lot of powerful insights, especially with the data that you guys have. There's a lot of maturity and as well wisdom that I think I always try to learn with the best.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it just goes on top of all of the things that I've been talking about so far. When it comes with 25 years, the experience that we've got in terms of all the different industries that people often don't think are branded. Over the years, we've had a lot of work from cement brands, for example, and oil and gas and steel brands that many people think, oh, it's just a commodity. How could that possibly have a brand? But over the course of that period of time, we've demonstrated that in even scenarios where the client came to us and said, no, I'm not sure that there's really anything here, but let's just check anyway. There has been significant positive business impact as a result of quantifying it and then using the brand in the right way. And I think what David is saying in his article is that you need to make sure that it is being done in a replicable and a transparent way by an independent assessor, which is what brand finance is, that can be done in a way that can be communicated to the decision makers to help them understand how to make the most out of their business and how to make the most out of the brand. And it's been interesting. There have been some situations where we've had a client come to us and say, oh, our competitor has outcompeted us because they have a much stronger brand than us. And then you have the same conversation with them saying, okay, well, here's what you need to do. You need to invest more in brand. And they say, oh, no, that doesn't work for us. Only our competitor can spend more in marketing because we're not a marketing organization. So even when they come to you and say that they want to do it, they don't. And it's through measurement that they can start that conversation. And sometimes it feels like turning an oil tanker, these big organizations, but it starts with one step down the road and a small project to demonstrate the value, to demonstrate to many of those decision makers how the process works and the various different inputs that you're putting into it, and also what the outcome is going to be. So, you know, David has spent 25 years trying to get brands to start down that road and take that first step. And there seems to be a lot more acceptance and willingness to do that now than there was many years ago across the spectrum, as there are more and more examples of highly branded companies in any industry. So, you know, the conversation is still ongoing, obviously, with boards and things like that. But I think we're moving in the right direction.
No, completely. So that's two parts here that is part of that article that I want to touch. And you touch one of them, the other not so much. So I want to go and probably can be a way of wrapping up. So in this article, the first thing, of course, there's the idea of define the brand in business, which you touch. The second one is incorporate brand stakeholders, and the third is transparency. So can you elaborate on the brand stakeholders and how to incorporate brand stakeholders in the brand for people listening to us? And I think this is really very important, but I would like to hear from your side, and as well the transparency, because of course a brand crisis, it's much more expensive, like you said, than actually try to save money, because if you have a crisis and you're not prepared, then you have a serious problem. And transparency normally is the way of killing issues or being prepared for issues, because everyone can have issues. Sometimes you don't expect them and they come. So I think these 2 points are really key. I would like to have your insights on this.
Yeah, so when it comes to the various different stakeholders, I suppose the ones that we're talking about most specifically are financial audiences, tax audiences, and legal audiences within the organization. They're the ones that want to be told straight, spoken to without what many might consider sort of the noise that is branding. And they want to see, how is this actually impacting the bottom line? How is this actually helping the business? And so often I will change the way that I speak to various different stakeholders depending on the level of knowledge that they're coming to the conversation with. And so when it's a more financially oriented stakeholder or person that I'm speaking to, I can be much more direct, and I can say, this is what's happening. Here's how the various different cost and revenue lines are changing, and stepping them through. And this comes down to the transparency aspect as well, helping them to understand how we're going about this so that they can be led down that road, and they can see that they could do it themselves if they really wanted to, but having an independent assessor is the right way to do it. But ultimately, once you get those stakeholders on board, then it makes the whole process much easier in terms of justifying the decisions that are being made as well. But it really does come down to having those open conversations, having the standards in place, like the ISO that we just talked about, so that there can be credibility and there can be understanding as to exactly how the process is happening and what needs to go into it. That's how you get those stakeholders on board. You don't ruffle, I mean, you don't muddle around the edges, you don't sort of try and obscure what you're trying to do. You definitely don't have a black box, which many people might think is the way that you look at brand. You just speak to them direct and you get them on board and you say, this is how the brand is bringing value to the business. And as soon as you can start demonstrating that, and this has been true in many of the clients that have been most engaged over the years, is when there's a small business case for use of the brand and you can actively demonstrate that more money has come out of it as a result. And so often the tax department is probably the best people because there are much more situations where they can genuinely see the benefit. But yeah, it is having those straightforward conversations without obfuscating the point and getting down to those financial numbers. That's the most important thing when you come to engaging different stakeholders.
Yeah, very wise and very necessary. So last one is, so from the experience that you and your organization have, it's how to deal with PR crisis related with brand, and especially the impact that is. I think if you can touch a bit that, because of course, it has, you have a lot of insights, and for people listening to us, I think you can just go to the website and find a lot of fantastic insights on this section. But I would like to hear purely from a business brand, because I think, of course, would be a big discussion on that level. But I'm more interested from a business brand and the finance value, because I think, like you said, like people come to you and they want to do a big change, but they don't want to spend money or they don't understand the impact. I've been seeing that all over in my career. But one of the things that I always struggle to see is, okay, how people are really negligent in terms of PR crisis and the importance of these things as the technology becomes more valuable and everything becomes more digital and more brand focused.
Yeah, I mean, I would say when it comes to PR crises, the first thing to say is that a brand is basically great insurance. People are going to be much more forgiving to you as your organization if you have a strong brand in the first place. If you have a relatively weak brand and a crisis happens, things are going to be much, much worse than if you have a strong brand and a crisis happens. There have been studies from some of our competitors, actually, that show that those that are the most reputable companies can suffer 3 substantial PR crises before they really start to see damage to their business. Most can recover quite quickly. When it comes to actually managing it in the moment and the tactical side of the crisis PR, obviously having a plan in place and implementing it very quickly is the only way to go when it comes to it. Trying to pretend that it doesn't exist and it's going to go away is probably just going to make things worse. But most of the crises that, most of the very famous crises that have happened, the brands have recovered from. So the emission scandal, many of the car brands have recovered from that. When Toyota had some braking problems, it recovered very well. Again, it had a very strong brand, so that was how it got through. But then some of the others like BP, it was already, people already sort of anticipated that it was a bit cavalier and sort of reckless because it's an oil and gas company, and therefore there was sort of negative headlines related to it. And many of the other oil and gas companies have seen that and have been really actively trying to enhance their brand and their persona over the last few years. And they're now moving towards the energy. So when it comes to crisis PR, basically having a strong brand is the best insurance policy. And making sure that you manage through the day by day tactical elements of it is also essential when it actually happens.
Thank you so much. I think it's very, very clear and very wise as well. So Richard, I want to thank you for these insights and for your time as well, because we passed almost 1 hour and something. So a lot of things, as I mentioned, I'm a huge fan of the work you guys have been doing. So I want to thank you for your time. We're going to put links to all of this and promote the work and a lot of these rankings. Some of them I'm more familiar than others. I will study it as well more. And I suggest everyone listening to us to look as well, because there's a great, first of all, a lot of learning, but as well a lot of insights that you can do. And of course, if you are more a corporation or a big organization, definitely this is much more relevant even for them. So thank you so much, Richard. I will appreciate, and wishing all success continues for the next probably 25 to 50 years. Thank you.
Thanks very much.